So being the big DJI fan that I am, I wanted to see how the Osmo Action stacked up against the Osmo Pocket. So today we're gonna do some head-to-heads here. We're gonna do a lot of different examples, audio tests, picture tests, HDR tests, stabilization, low light. So stay tuned, you guys will get to see a lot of examples of these. With that said, I wanna note that I upgraded the firmware on May 24th for both of these, so they both have the latest firmware. That includes true rock steady stabilization on the Osmo Action, and the Osmo Pocket, it has Pro mode as well as some recent tweaks and fixes. So with that said, let's dive into some footage and we'll jump back to our thoughts throughout the video as we stack these against one another. See you guys out there. It's right now recording on the Osmo Action as well as the Osmo Pocket. We're headed down to the pier in Santa Monica. I'm gonna go ahead and see how these two stack up against one another. So let me just stop right here real quick because you'll notice this scene sounds really windy. By default, the Osmo Action comes with wind reduction on. For whatever reason, in this scenario, there was no wind whatsoever. You can look at the trees, however, the wind noise was just really bad. But all the other subsequent scenes that I'm gonna film here still had wind reduction off while we're at the pier, and there's absolutely no wind noise. So a little bit confused, however, I would recommend always turning wind reduction on just based on this scene and how it turned out for me. So it's not that windy out, so I don't have wind reduction on the Osmo Action. I can see sometimes that makes the audio sound a little bad on other devices, so I wanted to turn that off. As well, the Osmo Pocket doesn't actually have that, so it's something I wanted to kind of level set them, see how they stack up against one another. Right off the bat, I gotta say the fact that the Osmo Action has such a wider field of view. It's also got 1080p 120, even though it has it at the lack of stabilization. HDR modes, it just seems like there's a lot more dynamic use cases for the Osmo Action. However, with the gimbal built in, there's a lot of options with the Osmo Pocket. It also has a lot of peripherals available to it, but right now for today, we're just gonna be stacking them up kind of stock devices, one against the other, and see how they do. So with that, let's go ahead and explore the pier. All right, so we just switched over to the 4K 60 modes on both cameras. Let's see if there's any noticeable difference between the two. Try to get some B-roll as well, but 4K 60 now. We were on 4K 30 earlier. Let's see if there's a difference. All right, so now you guys saw the B-roll. This was all filmed in 4K 60, except for the roller coaster scene, which was slow-mo 4X. I definitely thought for me, the Osmo Pocket looked more cinematic because of the field of view mostly. You get that depth separation. Now let's take a quick look at a slow motion example here so you can see a bird flying. What I wanted to do in this scene was actually run 8X slow motion on the Osmo Action because it allows for it. On the Osmo Pocket, you can only do 4X. You're really not losing too much quality either when we take a look at them side by side. So overall, just by sheer number of options, I think the Osmo Action wins in slow-mo. So what do you guys think on field of view? Right now, these are about the same distance. I can obviously move Osmo Pocket a lot closer, but at the end of the day, I feel like the field of view is gonna be a lot better on the Osmo Action here than the Osmo Pocket. Osmo Pocket, I'm holding it at a complete arm's length right now, as well as the Osmo Action. You just get so much more background here. Another thing to note is how does the audio sound? There's a good amount of people around. All right, so now we just switched into 1080p on both. The great thing on the Osmo Action is that it has 1080p 120 as well as 240. The best we can do in 1080p on the Osmo Pocket is actually 60p. So at the end of the day, the Osmo Action is going to give you a lot more flexibility. Now you do lose stabilization when you go this high frame rate. Osmo Action will actually go up to 240 at 1080 while recording audio, so let's try that now as well. All right, so now we're actually in 240 frames per second at a 1080p on the Osmo Action, and it's recording audio. That's pretty darn impressive if you ask me. Again, we're still on 1080p at 60 frames on the Osmo Pocket because that's all it supports in 1080 at the max frame rate. All right, so one of the main benefits too that you get with the Osmo Pocket here is that it has a real mechanical gimbal. So let's get out of the pier here. We're gonna go do a stabilization test. We'll try a few different frame rates as well as scenes that we can shoot in. So let's go over to where we like to do the stabilization test, and I'll see you guys there. All right, guys, so we got the Osmo Pocket and the Osmo Action. You know what spot we're at. It's our favorite stabilization test time. So we're gonna do 4K 60, 4K 30, and then we'll throw on HDR on the Osmo Action, which actually shuts off rock steady and electronic image stabilization. See how that does. Because we have mechanical on the Osmo Pocket, it's never gonna shut off. Let's see how these three modes stack up against one another. Let's get to it. All right, we're starting off on 4K 60. Gonna do our normal walking first, and then just kind of pick up speed as we get through here. Up to a full run. See how they look. All right, same test now in 4K 30. Starting off walking. Picking up speed. And now we're running. Last try in HDR. All right, so now we're in HDR mode. So no electronic image stabilization or rock steady. Just walking. Let's pick up speed. And now we're running. One thing I want to call out right now is that I noticed on the Osmo Action, it kept turning off my de-warp settings as I was switching through different camera modes. So it was actually turning that off when I was switching between 4K 30, 4K 60. Hopefully it's just a software bug that they'll fix pretty quickly, but something to be aware of. Make sure if you want de-warp off that you set it explicitly every time you're changing the camera settings. All right, so after looking at that stabilization test, I really thought they did a pretty even job in terms of how much they stabilized the footage, meaning you're gonna get great stable footage out of both of them, assuming you have rock steady turned on, which it doesn't always let you enable on the Osmo Action in various shooting modes, 120p, HDR. These are all modes where it's gonna turn it off, where with the mechanical gimbal on the Osmo Pocket, it's always gonna be on. Something to be aware of. However, contrasting that, when you look at this device, just the shape and form factor, it does have mounting brackets you can build for it, but it's going to give you very different mounting options depending on the type of stabilization you're trying to really perform. Where this you can mount to a bike, mount to your helmet much easier, it's not going to be as awkward. So really take that into mind, but I think if you're worried about stabilization, these are both going to be great options for you. All right, so we just got back, and one last thing I want to call out here is battery life. So we had 65% left over here on the Osmo Action, and we have 66% left over here on the Osmo Pocket. They were both at 100% when we left, and we were actually shooting in some higher frame rates on the Osmo Action. As well, it has bigger screens, which both of those factors should actually drain the battery faster, but 1% is really impressive. You can essentially assume you're going to have similar battery life out of both devices here. But on top of that, the Osmo Action actually has changeable batteries. So you can, on the fly, load a fresh battery in here, where on the Osmo Pocket, you're actually gonna have to plug it in and charge it, or use an external power source to provide power to it. So all in all, you gotta give battery life to the Osmo Action. It's a clear winner in my books. Sound quality, you've heard it throughout this video. It's a no-brainer. Osmo Pocket's gonna win here. Even though it doesn't have the wind reduction, it still did a great job at reducing the wind. Also, the way you hold it, you're kind of covering some of the microphones. You can get wind muffs for both of these. Ultimately, what I want to do is get external audio over USB-C. I think I'm going to use that predominantly on the Osmo Action, given how bad the audio quality was, at least relative to other professional options, or even the Osmo Pocket in here. All right, so right now we're doing an HDR test on both. We've got them both in normal picture profile modes. So what we're going to do is go ahead and flip them around here and just get an idea of how well this can actually expose my face. You notice we've got the sun kind of right in the background. It's going to be really tough shooting conditions. Let's throw on D-Cinelike now on both cameras. We'll see how that looks. And then last but not least, we'll throw on HDR on the Osmo Action and take a look at that as well. All right, so now we've got D-Cinelike on both. Again, we're just going to rotate around here, get the sun kind of right behind me. How's it look? How's it exposing my face? You'll notice the field of views are also very different. We're going to turn around. And then last but not least, we're gonna throw HDR as we mentioned. For this, we're gonna go normal picture profile on both because you don't have a D-Cinelike feature with HDR on the Osmo Action. So we'll have the Osmo Pocket on normal picture profile and the Osmo Action on HDR. Ready? All right, this is the last test then. We've got, again, HDR on the Osmo Action, and we're back to normal profile over on the Osmo Pocket. What do you guys think? How's it do with the sun directly behind me here? Can we see my face? Is it exposed? Is it exposing for the background or the foreground? All right, let's go get some more tests. All right, so HDR, I found a few varying results in my opinions. When we have normal picture profile on, I felt to me the Osmo Action looked a little bit better, sheerly talking dynamic range. I thought the clouds looked a little bit better, there were better blues in the sky, however, it's still exposed for my face. When we went into de-Cine-alike modes, I thought they were just about spot on even. I didn't really notice any drastic differences between the two. I felt the dynamic range in that more kind of flat profile mode was about even between the two. When we turn on HDR, the Osmo Action is definitely gonna win, but the real question is, do you wanna turn off stabilization? Unless you're taking photos, unless you're doing something where you just have the camera sitting, it's kind of a bummer that you don't get stabilization, and you can see the shock is very prevalent. So up to you if you want to use this HDR mode or not. It's definitely the best when you're talking sheer dynamic range, but the lack of stabilization is really a killer in my opinion. So low light examples, it's funny because they both have the same size sensors, but with the f2 aperture over the f2.8 on the Osmo Action, it does a significantly better job. You notice this in the kitchen when I was talking about the battery, and that wasn't even extreme low light. When we look out here in the dog park, to me, the Osmo Action just really didn't hold up to the Osmo Pocket at all. It maybe had less motion blur if you notice some of the bushes when there's a lot of detail. However, overall, the picture held up a lot better on the Osmo Pocket. It's funny, you have two examples when you're using cameras. You have an example where you're filming and how usable it is there, and then once you edit the footage and you take a look at it later. All right, so overall, the Osmo Action is really that go-to choice if you want a wide field of view, good dynamic range, swappable batteries with great battery life, eventually external audio, front-facing screen. Where the Osmo Pocket's gonna continue to shine is picture quality in contrast to the Osmo Action. It's got better picture quality, better low light performance, better onboard audio, and more of a cinematic view because the field of view isn't quite as wide. They both, again, have different use cases, so it really comes down to your needs. What do you want to spend your $350 on? They're at the exact same price point. Overall, those are my thoughts, guys. Let me know what you think. Ask any questions or comments down below. If you haven't subscribed already, definitely consider it. It's been a pleasure having you guys, and I'll see you next time.